a Russian war. A world is witnessing Chinese unilateralism and territorial expansionism. And a world is witnessing a UK which is post-Brexit. And in midst of all, we are piloting G20. We have made it a sort of a festival, which our foreign minister very correctly pointed out was more like Jan Bhagidari, more in the spirit of the way Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, has done a number of campaigns. But most important of all, it has to do with what it brings to the table. How are we going to renegotiate multilateralism? Is it our first time real investment into a multilateral forum? How are we going to make globalization more equitable, transparent, less opaque? From development of women to development led by women. As Prime Minister very rightly said in today's editorial, a wonderful piece. Transformative technology is one thing, but it has to be inclusive also. We are in a world where we have to deal with climate change. We are in a world where we will have to deal not only with the potential of AI, but we will have to deal with the disruption which AI brings to the table. And we are at a world where Prime Minister from 2014 has been talking about reforming institutions. And I'll start this conversation with a number of experts and top diplomats. You know, I was at the house of late Arun Jaitley, and I was in the 5th batch of journalists with the Prime Minister met. A lot of journalists were asking Prime Minister a lot of things. You know, why can't we go with you? Why can't we travel with you? What will you do? You know, what's your agenda? So Prime Minister said, you need to really ask me right questions. So all of us were taken aback. You know, that was supposed to be a sort of a conversation before the dinner. So Mr. Jaitley, late Arun Jaitley, was slightly pensive. And he said, you asked me the right questions. You asked me, when will India find its place in United Nations? You asked me, what are we doing to break this monotony and the structural domination of the Bretton Woods institutions? You have to ask me of the Global South, and sir, I'm talking about 2014-15. Now, I'm going to go to Mr. Ashok Sajjanar. Sir, is it correct for me to say that G22 is a great occasion and a personal initiative on part of Prime Minister Narendra Modi to renegotiate what global multilateralism stands for today?
I think you're very right. You know, first of all, I must compliment you. You know, when you have narrated all the challenges that the world confronts today, that is the situation today. And unfortunately, the situation also is that the multilateral institutions that were created in the or to bring in good health, good economy, they have all failed to deliver. And it is in that context that the importance of G20 has become so very high. It has become so very prominent. Because if these challenges were not there, or if these institutions had been able to resolve those challenges, then G20 would be like any other global institution. And that is why I think the fact that India is has taken over the presidency of that, because India today enjoys credibility. India today enjoys trust, not only for the fact that its economy has done so well. Over the last 9 years, from the 10th economy, we become the 5th largest economy. We are going to become the 3rd largest economy very, very soon. But also these challenges that have come, for instance, COVID. You know, there were apocalyptic predictions that India is going to see 50 million, 60 million deaths as a result of COVID, because our healthcare system is so fragile. But we have come out literally smelling of roses as a result of that. Not only have we been able to control that, we've been able to create our own vaccines and supply those vaccines, more than 300 million of them to 100. So the point I'm making is that challenges are there, and as the IMF and the World Bank says, India is the only bright spot and the only hope in this very gloomy and dark environment that we see around. And it is in that context that Prime Minister Modi and India, we are developing, we are creating, we are presenting a new narrative of a human-centric development to the world.
Human-centric, I think I'll go to Manju Seth on this, because when we talk about human-centric development, I recall it's also about Jan Bhagidari. There was a time when Dr. Manmohan Singh went for the Pittsburgh summit, and when we were there, the entire city was barricaded, and I could see the officers, big officers on the horseback patrolling the city. You don't expect them on the East Coast, maybe in the Austin or Texas, something like that. But then the whole city was closed down. You had protest centers. You had people come out. But this time, if you look at the data, the teachers have come out, students have participated. It's more like a festival. You don't have protests taking place. People have participated on an issue, a very foreign policy one, as if it is their own and domestic. Now, if that is a change on the table, what it brings to the country and what it shows to the world.
Absolutely. This was the very first time, as you rightly said, that there was these G20 meetings were held all over the country, and people even heard. We met so many people said, what is this G20? Now we know what it is. So that was a big, connect created with the people on all the issues facing the world and India. And this G20 Connect, which was created, Jan Bhagidari, as you mentioned, it has become a very, very positive sort of momentum to the whole G20 and to India's march forward. I think that has been a very important element of the whole G20 exercise, and all the other states in the country had a stake in it, had participation in it, and I think showcased India's development to the world as well, because the delegates came from all over the world to attend all these meetings that were held in different places. And so I think that was a very important message given by our Prime Minister also, and by the G20, to showcase India as well, and to see where we are going, and to focus on how we can bring value to the people and to people's lives and to the whole G20.
Is this the reason why the Prime Minister has been talking about, it's okay to talk about GDP, but let's talk about human-centric development?
Absolutely.
Is that the reason?
Absolutely. Human-centric development is what the focus should be on, not only on the GDP growth. That is an important aspect, but human-centric, women-led development, all these things that this current G20 is focusing on, and this presidency of India's. And as you rightly said initially, also one earth, one family, one future, for the whole concept of inclusive growth, of the last mile connectivity, last mile digital connectivity is what we've been talking about, and that has made a big impact and will impact the whole outcome of G20.
Just for the benefit of our viewers, when we talk about human-centric development, it's like not keeping capital in the middle of the development of the society. Capital is very, very important, but it's keeping humans at the center of the development when we talk about our society. That is why one planet, one earth, one future. And if you read foreign publication, Indian publications, I think I have seen it in my own life that something which used to be relegated to the back pages when I was a sub-editor is now the front page, and that is global change. That's the climate change. That's the result of the sort of lopsided industrialization which has happened over a period of time. Man and woman induced change, and I think that is something very important. But I would like to go back to the issue of Jan Bhagidari, because when our foreign minister wrote the edit and gave number of interviews, he has connected Jan Bhagidari with a lot of economic activity. He has argued that it has led to creation of wealth of knowledge, wealth in terms of connecting students, teachers, opinion. Mr. Malhotra, when foreign minister talks about Jan Bhagidari, he is also talking about participation, G20 becoming a campaign. But he also connects it with economic, social and knowledge assets being created.
Well, exactly. When the hoardings and the posters about the G20 had started appearing about a year ago, somebody from the metro city approached me and said, Yeah, we have heard about 2G, 4G and 5G. What is this G20 about? And why G पहले क्यों लगाया बाद में क्यों नहीं उसमें 5G में G बाद में आता है and now here G20. But since then I think thanks to the manner in which we have had very serious deliberations on a host of issues which are directly, indirectly impacting on the life of a common man, and in a very festive manner and in a very inclusive manner, taking it to God knows from east to west, north to south, particularly the University Connect program, under which lectures have been held all over India to the universities. And the last, when I went to one of the universities, I found the students quite knowledgeable about what is happening around. And they have begun to understand that this is just not an annual mela where all will come, eat, dine, wine, and go back and forget about it. There is now an awareness that there are very serious issues which are being debated upon, and this is a continuous process. This is a work in process. There is also a realization that it's not that on 10th of September, the G20 meeting will be over, and the results will start pouring in from the 15th of September, or maybe within 2-3 months. They understand that issues are uniting the world, and at the same time they are also dividing the world. And there is also, which is unfortunate, that the agenda is being hijacked by the geopolitical issues. But when we went and we told them that it's not all about geopolitical issues, in fact, geopolitical issue is not the mandate of the G20.
Correct.
And it has just fallen there because G7 countries are wanting to highlight this particular issue, and they have used a pretext for that. They say, yes, fine, it is a geopolitical issue, but the fallout of this geopolitical issue is economic, because it is impacting on energy security, food security, nutrition security, and many, many other things.
I think the biggest challenge in this case has been both China and Russia.
Yes, because Russia and the West are at conflict. And China is the most, the closest partner of Russia at this point of time. And therefore, it is quite obvious. There is an anti-China sentiment building up in the West also. So, this marriage of convenience, has strengthened over a period of time, particularly after the COVID and the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So, two of them are really hand in glove, and they want to defend each other's positions. And I will be not surprised if Russia tomorrow starts coming in favor of China's opposition to the references that we are planning to make on the debt stress of the developing countries, because China's Belt and Road Initiative particularly, and the way and the manner in which they are financing development projects in the smaller countries have put them into a very, very serious debt crisis. Sri Lanka is one of the examples. Almost went bankrupt. So we, India, and together with the Western countries, are trying to develop a mechanism where the interests of the poorest of the poor countries in terms of development will be taken care of. Small initiative was taken during the BRICS when the new development bank was established. And later on also we are looking at the possibility of India and Japan joining and undertaking some projects in the third countries. Also devising mechanism. Our own development cooperation and assistance program is very benign. We always give the partner country a choice to pick up a project and then say, okay, yes, we can do it or we cannot do it.
This G20 is also about a personal and a political statement, the way it has been articulated, the way the government has built a narrative, the way serving bureaucrats, serving ministers have spoken on this issue. It's married to the politics of a global hope, not a domestic hope, one. Secondly, Prime Minister has taken a personal initiative on this matter. It's not like any summit. And to our viewers, it's not as if G20 and other institutions were born today. But a personal investment often makes a lot of difference. For example, there used to be Quad, but then Quad got remade because of certain initiatives taken, certain international alignments which began to change. So similarly, even G20, or for example, just as a reference point, because G7 and G8, they were unable to deal with the crisis in 2008, then the realization came that, boss, we need to get those countries which are doing well. That is why the global global south, the vocabulary of the global south, perhaps talk about global south, people understand that the BRICS have financed over 96 projects and given $33 billion to various countries. You know, this might sound a little data. What is $33 billion and 96 projects when it comes to global economy? But I think it's a statement, you know, the sort of coming together of various economies. It's like breaking the dominance of the northern hemisphere. It's like other countries, post-colonial nations, taking a place in the sun. So coming back to the issue of Prime Minister, the issue at large is, how has Mr. Sachdev, Prime Minister, impacted, changed and reimagined G20?
Interesting question. It's not only reimagined G20. I would think, and my view is that the world of today is at a crux where the world is under reconstruction. Post-COVID, post-Russia-Ukraine war and China-America, who will be the #1 empire, the world has entered a completely new era, a new world matrix. At this point, a leadership, of course a charismatic leadership, thought leadership, backed with India's legacy, is the potent mix which Prime Minister is carrying forth and putting out. Couple of points I would say, in my view, we are already in a third world war. There is already a world war going. One a hard war and one a soft war. And this soft war is preparing for another fourth world war between China, Taiwan.
But sir, isn't this the Western terminology when they say that there is another Cold War and pick sides?
Sure, it may be Western, but it's my terminology that it's not another world war, Cold War. I'm saying it's not a Cold War, it is a world war. What else can you expect? Russia, its entire half foreign reserves confiscated, right? Russia totally thrown out of the world order, told that you do not belong to the world at all, cultural out, sports out, everything out. So the entire trend with the Russia-Ukraine war is that. One. On the other hand, the world is preparing, and when I say the world is preparing, both the US and China are preparing for a hot war, which will be a fourth world war upcoming when China starts to encircle or do whatever with Taiwan. The only thing is that how do various pieces line up? And at this juncture, therefore, be it the global south or let's say the rest of the world, you know, who are not into hard blocks, how do we navigate this whole scenario? At the same common sense to all these warring partners to avoid these wars and chart for human development in this globe. That's what I feel. You
know, when you talk about war, you know, there is a sort of a repetition of words from the Prime Minister. He would avoid that. You know, he would use word global south. The Prime Minister, in his multiple speeches and multiple forums, even today in ASEAN, he would talk about renegotiating broken multilateralism. You know, he would talk about making the decision making at the highest levels of multilateralism transparent, not opaque, not subjective. But then the global south has its own agendas. You know, the poor countries are in mode of coming to a place where they can say, well, we are almost developed. But then they are saddled with climate change, the carbon cost, development which is not taking into account poor people. And I think that's the biggest challenge. And if you look at the agenda of G20, if you look at the things, the ceremonies that have been organized in India, I think most of them were on paper. Mr. Dixit, that we have been able to chaperone the idea of global south properly in context of carbon, climate change and our priorities.
Yes, certainly. You know, we being the voice of the global south, we have sharpened, we have articulated the needs of global south, that food security, carbon print, then of course arms race, and not only that, women-led or women-centric development, and employment for youth, water, all SDGs. So we have been able to tell clearly the global north that these are the problems, these are the issues being faced by global south, and for those issues, global north is equally responsible for creation of these issues, if not more. And therefore, it becomes Global North responsibility to mitigate, to transfer the technology for mitigating these problems that the Global South is.
But we seem to be getting a lot of things from the North, even if we say that this is our priority. You had this birth of ChatGPT. Suddenly in newsrooms, the talk would be, do we really need to hire so many people, when we have got an AI to write the basic stuff? Okay, that's taken care of. Then suddenly, you have this digital transformation, you have robotics, good technologies, but in demography dense countries, how do we respond to these challenges through our priority, which we call Global South?
You see, the good technologies that you have mentioned, robotics, etc., they, to begin with, they are...
And there is AI also,
Yeah.
And the writers should be worried.
They are for the people who have access to it, or who are very well aware of it, while most of the population of Global South is not. So right now what we should do is what Global South needs first, like education, like clean water, like environment protection. These things are the basic things for people, because somebody has very rightly observed that I don't know what will be the issue for the World War III, but World War IV is going certainly to be fought on water. So these priorities, these scarcities that we are facing with food security, fertilizer security, these things are of priority to Global South people, majority of whom don't have access to all those digitized AI or you can say internet or robotics, because that will come, that also is needed, but that will be later stage. Right now, top priorities first.
Okay, Mr. Gupta, my question here is that when we talk about Global South, India also the countries from Global South gets a lot of lecture in context of the war, in terms of gas consumption, in terms of the consumption of the natural resources. But then, if you look at the consumption pattern of countries like Germany, Greece, their appetite for the oil has not gone down. India gets to, not hectored is the word, because we don't get hectored, but the lecturing takes place, that we need to stay away from such consumption patterns. But on the other hand, the Global North has not changed that behavior. They have not changed that behavior. Their consumption patterns remain high. Their carbon footprint remains high. Individual carbon footprint of an American household is 10 times higher than that of an Indian household. So that's the difference. It's unimaginable if you find houses in Noida to be globally heated. You go to any small town in Midwest America, every house is heated. These are not things to be trivialized. It tells you that we are carbon light. But the important point here is, can G20, I would say, become the place, arena, I know it's a gladiatorial word, arena, to negotiate all these things? Can it become that place?
Yes, you rightly pointed out that the way India has moving forward in terms of articulating of issues like climate change, and we have seen this northern hemisphere has miserably failed to protect the better institutions. In the Paris Agreement has been miserably failed by the withdrawal of the US. We have seen this, and again joining and the rejoining. So it indicates the lack of commitment towards the global institutions and the global governance. So this is an important point. This is a very important juncture that India has to show the commitment, the kind of commitment of a multilateral order, and that is why our Prime Minister has shown its commitment to diversify this multilateralism. One. Second point, I would like to add the digital public infrastructure. India is ready to show that yes, India is India is very happy to showcase its digitalization, and we are ready to payment for 1,000 rupees for the foreign delegates. So this is somehow the core area of the G20 is the public digitalization process, and this digitalization process is again a showcase for the global South, because all the countries are not in a position to emerge as a technological infrastructure.
Okay, Mr. Gupta, I'll come back to the question. When we talk about European protectionism, there's a tendency in American politics. You must have heard of Ram Murthy's speeches. He got more numbers than Trump in a couple of weeks. There is, I wouldn't say there's a wave of American nativism in the domestic politics, but that strand refuses to go away. And then we have G20. President Biden is coming, is arriving. Friday he's going to have bilateral. So in that context, where domestic politics of major important nations are behaving differently, could you just elucidate for us what is our challenge? Where should be our focus areas to really define our own agendas and imprint it?
Well, we are frankly not very much concerned with the domestic politics in the US. That is for the US to take care. But we have done very well in terms of forging very close relations with the United States.
Let me rephrase the question. If you recall, before Trump came in, for a year, Make America Great, there was a campaign. People underestimated it. But it started to reflect in his foreign policy. Then it became part of his manufacturing articulation, and it impacted everything.
Well, yes, there is a certain tendency for certain countries, and frankly, this tendency is spreading that they are thinking in terms of their country first. But ultimately, this is not something which is going to be very helpful or which is going to encourage creation of more global value, let's say global trade or global services or movement of finances and so on. So I think after a while we will realize that globalization helps and benefits everyone. The question is that the globalization may take a slightly different form now because of the changing politics. One example is the supply chains. The supply chains, the way they were situated earlier, they are changing. Now we are talking in terms of China plus one. Then we are talking in terms of supply chains moving to countries which are near major consumers or major centers of production, or which are where we can reduce the risk because of the abnormal behavior of certain countries like China, for instance. So yes, those kind of changes are going to take place. They are taking place, and but globalization, I think wholesale we can't discard it. Globalization has been there for ages. It's going to continue. It will take different forms, but ultimately it benefits everyone.
When you talk about benefiting everyone, it's like more than 70% of the global population, 85% of the GDP, I think 76% of the global trade. But then it doesn't entirely benefit everyone equally. It benefits some segments more and other segments less.
Well, yes, because the globalization is now being driven more and more by technology. So those who have joined the technology, who have got the technology, or who have got who are part of the digital economy, they are benefiting more. Those who are outside, those who are unable to join, they are benefiting less. So we have to acquire more skills. We have to go for more technologies. That is the bottom line. That is the underline.
Okay, let me go to Saibal Das Gupta on this. When we there are two questions here. One is Prime Minister and Jaishankar not only spoke about consumption and production, they also spoke about climate change. But I'll come to consumption and production part. Not only it's articulated that we need multiple centers of consumption, we also require multiple centers of production. That's one. So what do we mean when we talk about multiple centers of production in a world which is globalized? And in a globalized world, you have tension where there's a chip war here, and then everyone is afraid where the oil would pass through. That's one. And the second part in this segment of our conversation would be, what happens? How do we deal with climate change? How can G20 be the vanguard, a sort of a shepherd, sort of a light to tell the world, which we articulate in our domestic politics, one world, one family, that we are in it together. Saibal, can you just raise your hand? Saibal? Yeah. Saibal is there. Okay. Saibal?
Saibal's gone.
Achha, I think the Saibal is gone. So, Mr. Sajana, I would like you to, I thought Saibal is here with us. I would like you to take this question. How do we do that? If we are talking about multiple centers of consumption, how can multiple centers of production can be created?
Yeah, basically, I think what we have seen, particularly in the aftermath of the COVID, that there were so many items which are being produced in one country. And that country tried to weaponize its center of production, that is China. Because if it is concerning whether it is face masks or it is PPEs or it is ventilators, then it's only on your political positions that it was supplying. And I think that came as a rude shock as far as the world is concerned. Because in the process of globalization, they thought wherever efficiently some product can be manufactured, let us shift the production to that particular place. But then they realized that when there is this sort of weaponization, then we have multiple centers of production that need to be brought about. And I think that has started the whole process of China plus one. Because in all this, the issue of trust, the issue of reliability, the issue of credibility, that becomes very important. And that is what Prime Minister Modi has been projecting himself, that India is a trustworthy partner. So when we are talking about a China plus one, that means all the investment not going there. For the sometime it might be the most efficient place for production of goods, but it is not a trustworthy place, and that has been seen also as a result of its investments in the Belt and Road initiative. So I think here this realization has come to countries. So both as far as sensitive technologies are concerned, you don't want to share it with someone, with a country with which the trust deficit is there. So it is in that context that the issue of trust in the G20 context has also become very relevant and important.
So absolutely, I'll come to you. But there's also one more thing. When we talk about G20, I think everyone understands that the biggest threat is climate change. It's not discriminating anyone. You look at the fires in the Greece. You look at the Californian flooding. You look at what's happening in India in context of the deluge which Uttarakhand, which Himachal Pradesh has witnessed. People have forgotten about the Kashmir flooding. But the fact of the matter is that the world needs to be prepared. Do you think that the G20 is the territory which Prime Minister can pilot to actually throw the agenda of what we call a common future, one planet?
I think there are three aspects here. The first is that India has been taking a lead in green energy, in green hydrogen, investing money, but it is not getting the foreigners to invest the pledges that were made before in G20. So the agenda is that India wants that money so that India can implement a climate change agenda. The second thing is, the interesting thing is that in the American elections, there is a huge debate now with leading Republican contenders saying that they do not believe in climate change. So it will be very interesting.
Absolutely.
It will be very interesting to see how this debate pans out, because suddenly there is a new player on the block which just denies climate change. And thirdly, to my mind, as a G20 forum sort of institutionalizes this demand from the global south for funding, can the north walk the talk? Will money be available? Because, we need, bear in mind, this is not cheap. $20 billion a year just for India are needed for changing from fossil fuel to new fuel. So, the remote point of this G20 is, will they walk the talk, and will money come on the table?
Walking the talk is a different thing. But, I'm taking these quick answers. When we talk about e-technologies, you have this issue of gallium, you have this issue of rare earth, and all of them have been, there's a sort of a new colonial attitude towards it. Some doesn't want to export, some has saved it for future. And then you have places like Congo and other parts in South America where they have been taken over by the Chinese companies. So I think the challenges are huge.
Yes, definitely challenges are huge. And once we are talking about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, in fact, we are trying to address that challenge. Which country has started it? Of course, China, with its rare earth material monopoly. But it did not realize that some of these materials are available outside, and alternative materials will also be sought to for human growth, for general global growth. So that part is being addressed collectively by different groupings, different forums. But what is going to happen in this meeting? So we are aware of this problem, and India in fact has been in the forefront about meeting such challenges, and in different platforms it has been articulating quite well about it.
Because Prime Minister has been talking about it. Prime Minister has been saying that rare earth should not lead to a new colonial race. So you wanted to come in? Then I'll go to Mr. Saddev.
No, you were mentioning about the multiple centers of production.
Yes.
You know how they started, as you know, very briefly. They were all part of the integration of the world economy, etc., until, as Ambassador Sajanar also pointed out, we realized that how it was creating problems and monopolies and etc. The flip side of having multiple centers, if they still remain interconnected, is that whenever there are conflicts like Russia, Ukraine, or some other conflicts, the possibility of disruptions in the supply chains will remain there. So unless we...
Are you saying they're not going to go?
No, that's not going to go unless there is a consensus, and that's what we are trying to build through the G20, that whatever be the geopolitical situation, whatever be the natural disasters, calamities, the global value chains and the global supply chains should not get disrupted. That's the mood.
Okay. Mr. Sajdev, are you around? Okay. So my question to you is, do you think that by calling many countries, including those in West Asia, critics are saying it's become a bit of a crowd, but a lot of people are saying that that's the stamp of the Prime Minister's reformulated, re-energized West Asian politics. We are part of the Quad. We have different relationship with Saudi Arabia. We have broken the ice between the so-called MBS and MBZ. We have decoupled Palestine and Israel. Do you think that G20 is also reflecting that, sir?
Yes, it is. I think the emphasis that India has brought on the table is inclusiveness. Here I would like to specially mention that MBS is going to pay a bilateral visit.
For our viewers, Mohammed bin Salman. That's right. And MBZ was Mohammed bin Zayed.
That's right. Since you mentioned them, decoupling them, so I thought I could take on from there. He's going to pay a bilateral visit after the G20 summit.
Very important.
And that is going to be extremely important to watch, because such a bilateral summit was programmed last year, but due to scheduling difficulties, it didn't happen. And I think we are second largest trading partner of both Saudi Arabia and the UAE.
Okay.
And we are their second largest market after China for crude. And those things across the Arabian Sea are going to take a new paradigm, and it'll be interesting to watch.
I think just to add to this, just for the people to understand, when Trump became the president of the United States, the first trip, if I'm not wrong, correct me, on air, I think he went to Riyadh, and then, he danced with the swords and all that. So that's the importance when we talk about Saudi Arabia and the global politics. But gentleman is coming here, and it shows the way Prime Minister has redefined Indian outreach or Indian diplomacy in West Asia. But the bottom line is, I think the lot is at stake when it comes to G20. It's not only about redefining India's place or re-establishing India's place. I think certain norms, certain narratives are being changed, and I think those narratives are important. These are not the slogans, but that will define, we deal with the future. Thank you all of you for watching us on this special edition of G20 in News9 Mediaverse.
We will have 40 leaders of the G20 countries and international organizations coming to New Delhi for that summit. This is a culmination, as you said, of some 200 meetings that have preceded the summit. Those meetings, which are mainly sectoral in nature, health, environment, trade, etc., prepare the ground for the discussions and ultimate outcomes at the summit. But from a preparatory point of view, I think we have started quite a long time back. I remember even as early as 2020, when I was Foreign Secretary, we had a number of meetings to discuss preparations for the G20 presidency when we would take over. And the G20 Secretariat was set up a good 6 to 8 months before we assumed our presidency on the 1st of December last year. The process, of course, has received a lot of high-level support and facilitation. The Prime Minister himself has provided guidance. You saw that he released the logo and the theme of India's G20 presidency before we took over our presidency. He also addressed all governors and chief ministers on our presidency's, I would say, expectations and ambitions, and also, sought the cooperation of states and union territories in hosting a successful G20 presidency. And that laid the ground for our work with all of our partners and stakeholders in arranging G20 meetings across the length and breadth of our country. And I think from that point of view, in terms of planning, preparation, we have been well ahead of the curve. And as we near the most important event in our G20 calendar, I think every Indian can feel proud of the fact that we will have, in many senses, one of the most unique and unprecedented presidencies of this very important organization, which consists of the most important developed and emerging economies of the world. So India today, I think, is in many senses ready to host an event which few countries have the opportunity to really do in the manner that we have done and will be doing.
I would say for the Ministry of External Affairs and for us diplomats, this is like a Chandrayaan 3 moment. We are at the pinnacle of our diplomatic initiatives. In the past, we have had some multilateral events held in Delhi, like CHOGM or Non-Aligned Summit, India-Africa Summit. But the G20 is a different ball game. This is one of the most influential forum of global leaders. And since we are having this summit for the first time in India, we are paying special attention that not only we advance the G20 agenda effectively, but we also make G20 as people's presidency. So these are the two things. We advance G20 agenda by taking the agenda forward in through Sherpa and finance track, but we also take diplomatic initiative to the grassroots. We connect this momentous task with people's interests, people's concern, and our national priorities. I would say for the Ministry of External Affairs and for us diplomats, this is like a Chandrayaan 3 moment. We are at the pinnacle of our diplomatic initiatives. In the past, we have had some multilateral events held in Delhi, like CHOGM or Non-Aligned Summit, India-Africa Summit. But the G20 is a different ball game. This is one of the most influential forum of global leaders. And since we are having this summit for the first time in India, we are paying special attention that not only we advance the G20 agenda effectively, but we also make G20 as people's presidency. So these are the two things. We advance G20 agenda by taking the agenda forward in through Sherpa and finance track, but we also take diplomatic initiative to the grassroots. We connect this momentous task with people's interests, people's concern, and our national priorities.
मैं इमरान अहमद खान नियाजी सबके दिल से हल्फ उठाता हूँ
When Imran Khan came initially into politics, he thought his personal popularity would be sufficient for him. It didn't happen.
The retired military generals are openly saying that Imran Khan is a better choice.
Imran Khan may have bitten a bit too much, more than what he can chew.
Implosion. This and more, streaming on world's first news OTT, News9 Plus. Download now.
इंजीनियरिंग कर रहे हैं, क्योंकि सभी लोग कर रहे हैं.
Coaching is now starting from grade 3, 4, 5, 6.
कोटा जाने वाली बीच राह में आधे टेस्ट देके हैं सिलेक्शन की चाह में.
ऑल इंडिया का बच्चा कोटा जाता है.
This rat race is for rats, not for humans. So why should we even be a part of it?
The Rat Race. This and more, streaming on world's first news OTT, News9 Plus. Download now. BrahMos. Stealthy, lethal, precise. It flies at 3 times the speed of sound and cuts through a warship like a hot knife through butter. China's navy has threatened its neighbors, and they are turning to the BrahMos for protection. The warship killer. This and more, streaming on world's first news OTT, News9 Plus. Download now.
मैं इमरान अहमद खान नियाजी सबके दिल से हल्फ उठाता हूँ.
When Imran Khan came initially into politics, he thought his personal popularity would be sufficient for him. It didn't happen.
The retired military generals are openly saying that Imran Khan is a better choice.
Imran Khan may have bitten a bit too much, more than what he can chew.
Implosion. This and more, streaming on world's first news OTT, News9 Plus. Download now.
इंजीनियरिंग कर रहे हैं, क्योंकि सभी लोग कर रहे हैं.
Coaching is now starting from grade 3, 4, 5, 6.
कोटा जाने वाली बीच राह में आधे टेस्ट देके हैं सिलेक्शन की चाह में.
ऑल इंडिया का बच्चा कोटा जाता है.
This rat race is for rats, not for humans. So why should we even be a part of it?
The Rat Race. This and more, streaming on world's first news OTT, News9 Plus. Download now. BrahMos. Stealthy, lethal, precise. It flies at 3 times the speed of sound and cuts through a warship like a hot